Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast. Tonight, your hosts bring you part 2 of Fallen Worlds. Tonight's the introduction of Chasing Giants. What's going on, everybody?
Not too much. How about you guys?
It is our first recording of the new year, so how do you guys feel about that?
We made it into another year. So we have been teasing and kind of hinting at this for over how many years now? How long has it been?
Well, we've been teasing the entire series of Fallen Worlds for now. This is I think 4 years is going into 4 years.
Yeah, it has been, and we always wanted to get into the this part of it. So this is kind of exciting, is what I'm saying.
So tonight we're going to be diving into the whole giant lore. Every civilization in history has stories of giants, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's always, it's always been there. You can look through so many different ones, and there are stories of giants or men of great stature, right? So,
yep.
Why don't we start with where it began? That whole, the whole thing.
Well, there's a few different theories, but like you said, it all really started, I guess, in religion and in the stories of the Nephilim, mm-hmm. which the Nephilim, the word Nephilim, a lot of people think that it only means giants, but it's it's the hybridization of the divine and the carnal, the spirit and flesh, divine beings, angels, and the women of earth. But it didn't just stop with women. There were animals that got involved. Were angels interbred with animals and interbred with inanimate objects like trees and things of that nature, and created these abominations, they were called. And they weren't always giants. A lot of people will say the word Nephilim and they'll think that it mainly talks about giants, but all that really translates out to directly is of great renown. So yes, mm-hmm. some were giants based off canonical texts, mm-hmm. And some had abilities that were beyond human abilities. So what does this, when we look into the Nephilim, we're looking into various segments. And specifically for tonight's subject, we're looking in the direction of giants. So one of the most recognized giants in the Judeo-Christian teachings, and it's in Judaism, it's in Christianity, it's in Islam, is the tale of David and Goliath. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Goliath, or Gol of Gath, was a giant, and he had brothers who were also giants, and they were descendants of a giant race called the Anki. Ron, you can talk about the Ankh, the clan of Anki, or the Anki people, or
Anakim,
Ankh a little
Anakim,
bit.
Ankh, all the words that variously go into it. You mean, because there's just so many translations, and I think
go into that just a little bit and talk about the. We don't want to do a deep.
No, we're not.
This part just yet.
That's
just
a different part.
Give them references.
But to give us a background on these giants, we have to talk about where they came from, right? Because they are the sons of the fallen, so to speak, right? So
yes, that is biblically, if that's what we're looking at. Yes, that is they're the children of the fallen.
And if we're not looking at it biblically, we can look at it in many different ways. I mean, you can look at it in the ancient astronaut way, I guess, right, and say that this is all aliens. But you can interpret it that way if you want. They are the sons of something. Let's put it that way. And that something,
they're the sons of something.
There's the sons of something. And they came here, according to the legend, and they basically not only, I can't say that they bred with humans. They did something. They experimented, kind of, is how I get out of the whole thing, is they kind of experimented, because you said that they crossed them with various things. And it's not just themselves,
yes,
right?
The Bible does say that they looked at them with lustful eyes. They found them attractive, the women of earth, and they laid with women of earth. Now,
for sure,
with the other animals and with the plants and things of that nature, that does get into a little bit more of an experimental nature, I would say.
We kind of have to look at it in different ways, because we're talking about, to some people, spiritual things. When you say angels, and you're talking about these spiritual things, but we're not, so to speak. We're talking about these things, like you said, they came down and they lusted. Okay, that implies that they actually were physical, doesn't it? So whatever they were, they came here, they procreated with humans, and they created a different species, so to speak, or a hybrid race, in other words. And we'll talk about their lineage in another episode, about the actual Watchers and so forth. But that's where they came from, right? I mean, that's how this all started.
Yep. That's the origin point.
So what you were asking before was the Anakim, or the what was the other word? There's so many different words, and it's all that root.
The Anki.
Anki, the Anki, the Anakim. There's so many, but we all know where that.
Sons of Ankh.
And we all know where that kind of goes to, don't we? In the Sumerian tradition, the Anunnaki. So you lead into that kind of stuff, and with that, there are people who do believe that, the Anunnaki. They were massive. What should I say? So they were giants. I mean, there are people who do say that they were giants, right? Because the Anakim were giants. They're a race of giants descended from the Anak. So in that translation, these were that, I guess, society. Is that what I'm looking for here? Because they came down, they formed a society, right? So there they are. They're now interwoven into human culture. And if we, again, go by the Judeo-Christian version, it was over 200 some of these descended in the fall, and they spread out. And they gave humans all this amazing technology as well. So they boosted technology in the days. And, of course, the technology, some of it was basically sorcery and looked at as magic. So we get a lot of our wisdom learnings from these fallen, whoever they were. And we also get the giants from them, apparently, because it kind of seems like that's a byproduct of this intergalactic or interdimensional mingling, I guess, right?
Yeah, that is kind of what it seems. And the reason we're covering all of this bits and pieces is because eventually this brings us into the Americas, and we live in an area that is referred to as the Valley of the Giants. Ron and I live here. Wayne lives in Indiana. Now he also lives in an area where there were mounds discovered as well. But this specific area that Ron and I live in is referred to as the Valley of the Giants, for what could be perceived as multiple reasons. And we're going to cover some of those reasons tonight with you guys. And there's all these ancient cultures that talked about giants, and then you come into this period where all of a sudden it seems like it stops, right? And then all of a sudden you have the Adena and the Hopewell culture here on the East Coast, and we have these mounds that were built. The mounds were attributed to the Adena and the Hopewell people. And during the excavation of some of the mounds in the Kanawha Valley in West Virginia, it was said that there were giants recovered from these mounds. So then all of a sudden we have these beings popping up again. And when you look through all of the ancient texts, it seems to point towards a race of giant people existing. Because it goes with almost every culture, like we had stated earlier. They have some kind of story of giants that helped or that they warred against. And we don't have a whole lot of data to go off of because, this was prehistory stuff here in the Americas, right? We have remains of their villages. We have the mounds. We have skeletal remains. And then something that we're going to touch on later is what we call the mishandling of the Smithsonian, which is just egregious, but nonetheless, we need to cover that a little bit because there's a lot of people who will use the Smithsonian saying, oh, well, we never found anything. and just take it as verbatim
Fact.
truth.
That's fact. Yeah. Oh yeah. They'll absolutely argue you on the fact that giants. It's not real. It was all just a misunderstanding. But I think one of the most amazing things while doing this research, and you mentioned the mounds, and we always knew where that was, but I did not know, and I started doing a little research, and I was trying to find all these different giant references in the Bible, and the last giant to fall was Og. So
Yes.
okay, did you know that where this was? I'm going to read this to you and just verbatim how it says. Og is introduced in the book of Numbers, like his neighbors, whom Moses had previously conquered at the Battle of Jahaz. So here's the great thing. The place where this happens, 60 walled cities, many unwalled towns with his capital of Ashtaroth. I'm murdering these names, but probably modern Tel El-Sharai. Anyway, there still exists 70-foot mounds.
So there we have mounds being built in the Americas.
Yeah.
We have mounds being built in South America. We have mounds being built in the Middle East.
We see them everywhere. There are mounds everywhere, literally everywhere. Pumapunku, there's a mound there. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's actually built on what is basically a base of a mound. There are mounds everywhere. This is something that drives me crazy because for whatever reason, modern archaeologists believe that this is something that just sprang up, several hundred years ago, I mean, how do you get that?
And to put this into perspective for you guys as well, in time frames, the prehistory in America was different than prehistory elsewhere in the world. We call it prehistory because nothing was really recorded, right? That's basically the definition. Is it's before recorded history. Here in America, these mound builders, the Adena and the Hopewell culture, they were here doing their thing around the same time that the Israelites were being led out of Egypt. Just to put that into a time perspective, because I'm sure most people are familiar with, Moses parting the Red Sea and all that good stuff. So it was around all that same time, but just in a different continent. But we still had mound builders here, just as there were there. You can draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, so it basically draws this vivid picture of something existing here with humans, right? Like coexisting, basically, is what I'm trying to get at least for a while, they coexisted. It kind of seems like they were never meant to coexist, and they did a lot of fighting, and eventually one side wiped out the other. But it was also said that side was wiped out by God or by the gods in other traditions. So they kind of seem like they were either not supposed to be here or they were invaders or something to that nature, right? So,
well, the flood was supposed to have been a big setup to kill out a lot of them.
That's
right.
right.
We covered the floods in part
Chapter
1 of
one.
this series, and now we're dealing with some of the aftermath, right?
So we have survivors, is what we're saying.
Yeah, these are the survivors. And, the Middle East and all of that area over there was a little bit more advanced on the cutting edge of technology and structures and whatnot, more so than what we had here at the time. So imagine a less developed civilization having to recover from that. And that's what we had here in the Americas.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
At least in North America.
Yeah.
So the giants were mostly killed during the flood. There were some stragglers that survived, as would have with basically the rest of humanity. There were stragglers that survived, and then they went on, and like Ron said, oftentimes they warred with everyone else, and they were pretty tough. They were a force to be reckoned with. Now here we don't know much about them. We just know that they were found in the mounds, and there were stories of great giants that go all the way back, right?
Right. There's tons of them.
And they were even so much so that they were actually in our history books, in our West Virginia study history books, but they've since been removed with updates and whatnot. But this was a topic that was actually taught in our history classes, guys. I'm sure some of you who are a little bit older might remember it if you're native to West Virginia.
I would like to hear you. I would really like to hear from those who actually remember hearing about the giants in your West Virginia social studies classes, because
Yeah,
that's
West
where
Virginia
we
history
learned.
or West Virginia studies.
Yeah, that's where we learned it. And gosh, that was in the probably the 80s or 90s, something like that. But
Yeah, mine was in the late 90s. I had it in 1999.
yeah. So if there's anyone out there listening and you remember this, let us know, so we don't think that we've been in some alternate universe like some of these people believe, because it happened. And I remember it. I remember it very well. I had a good history teacher, and I remember them telling us this story. And I remember reading about it in the actual book that there were, and they didn't say actually, that these were giants, as in Jolly Green giants. They said these were giants, as in they were giant stature, that they were very, very big. And that's what we hear, right? I mean, that's what all the news clippings and news stories say. And they are out there, guys. You don't have to look very far to find them. I mean,
No, you don't.
You don't. And you have so many people who are just like, no, that never happened. Yeah, it happened. I mean, go to like newspapers.com and just do a search for giants, mounds, and you will be surprised at what comes up.
So, like Ron was saying just a moment ago, that it seemed like these cultures warred with one another and they warred with other people. It wasn't a whole lot different over here, because we had stories of First Nations people, early First Nations people, having wars with the red-haired giants. And that specifically ties in to Lovelock Cave. And Wayne, I'm sure are you familiar with Lovelock Cave?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am.
Go ahead and tell the listeners a little bit about Lovelock Cave.
Well, that's from if I remember right, the Paiute tribe, and that's where their legend says, basically, if I remember correctly, that there's a giant people who practiced cannibalism, and they lived in Lovelock Cave, and that's where they later then found human remains. And I think if I remember right on that one, they found a few of the human bones, and the marrow had been removed, suggesting maybe that it was eaten, or which kind of led credence to the cannibalism that they had talked about, that the tribes had talked about. And of course, cannibalism wasn't like an active practice among the First Nations people or anything that I know of, but the remains did have some red hair. But darker hair can turn red or have a reddish tint,
Yeah, especially once it's set and kind of aged. You're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I remember right, that was, in the early 1900s when they found them. Like when they were excavating that, or when they unearthed or whatever the artifacts, that they didn't handle that whole site very well.
Well, this goes back into the Smithsonian mishandling stuff. We got lucky though, because there were some skulls from Lovelock Cave that are actually sitting in a university shelf in Nevada. Okay.
Yeah.
And the skulls look very human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you put a human skull beside it.
True.
And it's about 30% larger.
Yeah. When you put scale next to it, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
I think that's what
vastly different size.
Unless you're using like Johnny Bench's skull or something, that
Right.
He's got a big head. But yeah, I mean, that's, if you remember, I mean, it's not just the Paiutes that talked about. There's a lot of tribes that, like you were saying earlier, that have talked about, what is it? Was it the Choctaw in Tennessee?
Yes.
That were constantly warring with a race of giants.
Yes.
And then they were kind of cannibalistic also, if I remember right, maybe.
That I believe that is correct. There's a few other tribes that belong to the Algonquin Nation that also share stories of these cannibal giants that they had to fight with.
But didn't they say the Choctaw, and I don't know that the Paiutes are saying that they were of Native American descent, but I remember, if I'm right, if that was the Choctaw, I remember the Tennessee tribe, and I think it's the Choctaw. I might be wrong on that, but I remember them referring to it, because I always found it kind of really specific on that one, that the giants were a white race.
That would be something I'd have to look into. Actually, dang it, I didn't even have to look into it that far. As soon as I typed in Choctaw giants, the first article that shows up is an ancient race of white giants.
Okay.
Which conveniently ties into what we're going to go into here in just a moment.
The Shawnee.
And
Yep.
that's what we call a segue.
That is what we call a segue, boys and girls.
Well, that comes back to our hometowns, though, doesn't it?
It does. It brings it right back home. So we started this track off at Lovelock Cave and brought her all the way back around here again to this race of white giants. And
but that just shows it wasn't just, not saying you were saying that, but it wasn't just, it lets everybody know that it wasn't just in the Ohio Valley or the West Virginia area, it was all over North America.
Oh yeah, there's been mounds literally found all over North America. We're going to put up a link for you guys to look at. You can go browse to your heart's content on the Library of Congress. There's a webpage there that you can just go and type up, and it'll look through every old publication, every old newspaper publication from 1777 up to I think 2000 something, and have at it. It'll highlight them for you. It'll you can look up all those. And there's so many stories. It became so commonplace back then, guys. This wasn't news to these people back then.
No.
It was like you'd be reading the newspaper. Oh, well, this happened. And literally, here's one. They'll be just stuck right in the middle for no reason at all. Unearthed skeleton of giant, bones of supposed mound builder, those of man 8 or 9 feet high. Right there. That's it. And this one actually has a little bit more information, but usually it's just about that much words. It's like, someone was digging a cornfield and found the bones, because that's what was happening back then.
Yeah, there was one particular one where someone was digging plowing a field on the edge of the Ohio River, and they struck a bone, which it turned out being a 42-inch femur.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can project the height of a 42-inch femur, a person with a 42-inch femur, because they actually found the other parts of the remains of this individual, and they were interned into a Native American burial site. So we can no longer see those. We can no longer touch them. They didn't go to the Smithsonian. This was an actual documented paper trail, handing over these remains.
I have to actually interject here. Good, because that's where they belonged. Because here's what's going to happen. I would say anytime rescue history, put it out there for the public. But the problem is it hasn't been. And there seems to be this it's alleged. I can't say it's 100% fact, but boy, is that case growing more and more, that a lot of this history has been literally erased. And this is, like I said, this is history that people just believed. It was common sense, to these people back, 100 years ago. Here's another article. Dr. Holland and Peterson supervised the exploration of the Sasquatch Mound with the greatest of care. The curators believed the man whose skeleton, this was another giant, they secured belonged to the mound builder class. They suspected they were already here. They inhabited the section of land in the Americas before the American Indians. This was common back then. I know you think, wow, they thought they knew this stuff back then, and science marches on and proves stuff.
Here is an actual, because like Ron said, we've been working on this for several years, and we're actually writing a book, guys. So this is a segment of the book you're going to get a preview of. It is the 12th annual report of the Bureau of American Ethnology of the Smithsonian Institute 1894 edition. So this was accompanied by 2 more giants discovered in the now known as Shawnee Mound in Institute, West Virginia, just 5 miles away from the other side of the river. Excavations made at the Shawnee Mound revealed it to be yet another double-storied structure. The exploration was made by first sinking a vertical shaft through the center of the mound down to and slightly below the original surface of the ground, similar to what was performed at the Krill Mound. This mound was about as high as the modern 3-story house. Within the mound were found successive layers of skeletons, some of them in a sepulcher, and then, in quotes, a stone vault, and those nearer to the bottom in a large wooden vault. Some of the beams were walnut, measured 12 inches in diameter. Special note to the large skeletons that were discovered in a sitting position with their legs interlocked. This was different from the Krill Mound in the case that the giants seemed to be protecting the sepulcher. Where the Krill Mound, the single giant was surrounded by average-sized skeletons. That's actually a Smithsonian Institute article, guys. They acknowledge the giants here, but then they flip-flop and they change it over and say that there was no evidence.
Hey guys, can I read something?
Yeah.
I found this statement that was recorded from a Comanche chief, and I thought you might find it interesting. It's just a couple paragraphs. Let me read it real quick. It says, Chief Rolling Thunder of the Comanches, a tribe from the Great Plains, gave the following account of an ancient race of white giants in 1857. Innumerable moons ago, a race of white men 10 feet high and far more rich and powerful than any white people now living here inhabited a large range of country extending from the rising to the setting sun. Their fortifications crowned the summits of the mountains, protecting their populous cities situated in the intervening valleys. He goes on to say they excelled in every other nation which was flourished either before or since in all manner of cunning handicraft, were brave and warlike, ruling over the land they had wrested from its ancient possessions with a high and haughty hand. Compared with them, the pale faces of the present day were pygmies in both art and arms. And then it says the chief explained that when this race forgot justice and mercy and became too proud, the Great Spirit wiped it out, and all that was left of their society were the mounds still visible on the tablelands.
Wow. And that's pretty consistent with, what other legends have said, right? I mean, this, again, was no great mystery to the people who were here before.
Yeah, and this was a chief of a tribe that was, the Comanches were a respected, they were not, and they were very warrior-like.
Yes.
So for him to say that, and then mention the pale faces of today, so you get the,
you get that, and
So he's not misunderstanding that these white men before were white men.
They were nothing like.
Yeah, they were nothing like them.
Yeah,
but
apples and oranges.
Yeah, but they compared them to the white men like us, our ancestors.
My ancestors were gray.
Well, we know that.
Anyway,
I think your ancestors were just floating forms for a while.
Some still are.
Yeah.
So,
but he compared them, and you know what I'm saying? He understood that they were somewhat like us.
No, yeah, right, absolutely.
And not like the First Nations people, that he had encountered of any other tribe, and then talks about how much different, they were at doing crafts and doing, war and everything. I mean, that's just, to me, when you get recorded something like that, a chief of a tribe says, then that to me holds a little more weight than just,
a story.
Dr. Johnson from, Harvard. You know what I'm saying? I just really do put a lot more into that.
Well, you have to look at it for what it is too. It's an account, and it's a historical account. It's to, a lot of people, just the words or just a legend, but no, it's not. These people didn't make that stuff up. That's not what this was.
Yeah, every day they were trying to survive. They weren't sitting around making up stories.
No. And when they were, that was the art of the storyteller, to sit around and figure that out. But they always had some kind of meaning to them. Even their stories had real, characters. Okay. So that's a thing. They were repeating things. It's kind of like our, I guess it's kind of like, the Marvel universe, there's certain characters that repeated in a lot of these stories. And one of those characters that did repeat in a lot of those stories were giants. And the battles were always mentioned. And it was meant to pass down, in my opinion, that these things were real. And you should have respect for them. The Shawnee, a very fierce warrior race. And we know this. They were amazing at what they were. Very respected, very feared. Yet they were afraid of this area because they believed it was haunted by ghosts of giants.
Yeah, the entire valley, the entire valley that we live in, running up the Kanawha River, was believed to be haunted by the ghost of giants.
All the way into Ohio, actually, I believe it was. Yeah, the ghost of giants that their ancestors had killed, basically. So there's that war again. There was always this mention of there was this war between normal people, I guess. I'm just trying to figure out a word because I stumble every time we get there. It's like, between what? Were they just tall people? Because we do have gigantism, don't we? I mean, that's a thing, but maybe that's the reason that we have that. Maybe that is a part of our DNA. It
could be. You're right. It could be a part of our DNA that's kind of locked.
Yeah.
And then in certain individuals, it unlocks, and they have, but But the differences between them and some of these remains that you can actually take a look at, specifically the ones from Nevada, is that the skulls are terribly misshapen in somebody who suffers from gigantism.
Mm-hmm.
They don't look normal. You can tell there was something off. Certain limbs will be curved instead of being straight. But speaking of the remains here, we have these tales of warring times with giants, but it also seems with specifically the Shawnee Mound in Institute and the Krill Mound in South Charleston, that at least during this time period that they coexisted, because the way the burials were almost
ceremonial.
One was ceremonial and the other one was almost in a protective way. For example, the one in Charleston, there was only one giant that was pulled from the Charleston Mound, and he was estimated to be 7 foot 6 inches, and they measured him between the shoulder sockets, because when a body decays in the ground, the bones become disjointed and they can move and they can separate, and the skeletons can look much larger than what they actually were because the connective tissue's gone and stuff kind of will spread out and settle.
It distorts.
But this was measured between the shoulder sockets, right? It was 19 inches from socket to socket.
That's pretty
big. That's a pretty big torso, pretty large span. Now,
here, let me just say this, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but you also have to remember too that, okay, we see people 6 foot something all the time, right? 6'5", 6'9", 7 foot, and 7 foot, you go, wow, that's a big dude. But we see that, there are people that are tall like that. But you have to remember, back then, people weren't that tall. Their heights weren't, they weren't, averaging 6 foot like we do now, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, think about it. They were probably 5 foot tall, give or take, 5'3", whatever. They weren't big people a lot of times. So when you see someone that's 2 foot taller than you, that's huge. That's a scary thing.
Exactly. So these weren't 9 foot giants technically, that were found. These were 7.5 foot, in all the cases here in the Kanawha Valley.
Yeah, but like I said, like if you look at the average person in the 1800s, they weren't big people. They weren't like we have now. They weren't massively big people. But like I said, you get somebody that's
the average height of the Adena people was 5'2" to 5'4".
Exactly. And that was
a 7.5 foot person coming up to him is just going to dwarf them,
especially a whole tribe of them.
Right. Now,
that's true.
So in the Krill Mound, the massive, the 7.5 foot skeleton was found dead center of the mound, and he was surrounded by 10 other skeletons in a wheel spoke pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And his feet were pointing towards the east.
Again, ceremonial.
So there was care taken in consideration, and the other skeletons that were laid around him were laid around him as if they were protecting him, because their feet were all facing inward towards him, right? Mm-hmm. And they found large hammered copper breastplate and large bracelets. Now, the one thing to note about the bracelets, with the large bracelets, is the bracelets that were found with this skeleton were much larger than what it would have fit an average person back then. They would have just fell right off. Mm-hmm. So these were worn around the wrist and whatnot. So they were
for the average person a neck collar.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty daggone close to that.
Did they find any leashes or anything? Because
yeah, no, they didn't find.
They may have been pets. We don't know.
Right.
It very well could have, because sometimes we're going to get to that in just a second, because it's a possibility. You don't know. Then there was several much larger than usual spears found in this area as well, the chamber where they found this one. But then you go over to the Shawnee Mound, and the body was in a different place, because this time there were 2 of these massive humans that were 7.5 feet tall, except this time they were on their knees facing outward from this sarcophagus.
Mm-hmm.
There was this stone, a hewn out of stone chest, a sepulcher. And in the sepulcher were burned remains. It was a cremation of some sort. So we don't know, whoever it was, this person was burned and placed into this, their remains were placed into this sepulcher. And then the two giants were on their knees facing outward from the ends of this sepulcher, almost like they were defending it. Why would they be defending it?
Unless they held that person was held in high regard. That's the only reason you would think.
Mm-hmm.
Could it have been something that was held in high regard, or something that was extremely dangerous and didn't want to be
protected?
released?
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a few ways to look at this, because again, this is all, unfortunately, this part of it is speculation because it's prehistory.
Yeah,
it is, and we are kind of building off of it on kind of the other legends that there was this us versus them mentality to this kind of thing. So, you know,
but here we see this relationship.
Yeah, there was a relationship for a while.
Yep. And then it degraded.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, the Adena and the Hopewell, they predated the Shawnee, the Choctaw,
mm-hmm.
the Cherokee. They're what became in later days.
Yeah.
Those peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, the cooperation disintegrated. And we see this in many Native American stories. And it doesn't just involve giants. It also involves what we lovingly refer to as Sasquatch. Now, we're not saying that what is in those mounds and what was recovered was a Sasquatch, but it has to be at least looked at as a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely look at it as a possibility.
Could it have been what became the people that were the Sasquatch? Because, you know, the Native Americans often referred to these giants as the other brother or the other tribe.
That's right.
Could they have been one and the same?
Me being an expert on Sasquatch, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
You're fired.
Oh my God, I can't. That was said, people, with so much jest in that listen, we've already covered that in a previous episode, and I vented.
Yeah.
So that was a joke. But I mean, absolutely, and even as you go out west, it's the same thing. I mean, were these things that out west, you know, just because they weren't completely hair covered does not mean that wasn't what they were relating, you know, in later times as a Sasquatch, because some races or some tribes got along with, you know, the Sasquatch in their stories, and some did not.
Yeah.
All across the, you know, the North American continent, you have varying degrees of, we'll say, friendship,
mm-hmm.
or lack of, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, who's to say that isn't, you know, a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, a stone giant, whatever you want to say, because every tribe calls them something different. But they all have the same characteristics of some kind, being big, you know, but like I was saying, they all have that, you know, some were friends, some were, you know, the helpers of the tribes, some were the enemies of the tribe, which goes back to what you were saying, that relationship with the two skeletons found in there. Maybe that was one of the tribes that were friendly with them.
Right.
You know,
and
they had much
very well
respect
could
for each
be.
other.
And one of the reasons that actually we started to look into this hypothesis of what these giants could be, because it's speculation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We know that they were found. We don't know what or who they were. You know, you have this race of white giants, you have a race of red-haired giants, you have a race, this tribes that speak about Bigfoot and tribes that talk about, you know, the other brother and whatnot. But then we found in the same era, Ron and I, while we were working on Fallen Worlds, stumbled upon a private collection. And I took Ron to go meet a dealer.
You didn't break anything when you stumbled on it, did you?
Almost. Because I was actually moving something when I found this this flyer, is a pamphlet rather. And while we were in there, we were looking at a rock and mineral dealer, and he also has fossils and artifacts. And he runs a private museum out of Kentucky. And Ron was talking to the gentleman, and I looked down on the ground near that box that I just moved, and I saw something, and it was folded in half perfectly. And I said, Ron, do you see that? Do you know what that is? And Ron looked at it and said, oh my God. And I picked it up, and I said, you know what this is, right? He said, that's Bigfoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, if it's not Bigfoot, then I don't know what it is. And there's not many things I'll say that about, by the way. I won't say, oh, that's Bigfoot. I'll say that's Bigfoot. I mean, just because of the description, and it matches a lot of the native art designs of Bigfoot.
So you all have been to this gentleman's place?
We haven't gone to his place, but he sent us to the place that actually had this artifact.
Yeah, we did one better.
Well,
we went to the location is the Southern Ohio History Museum, Natural History Museum.
Well, we must go. You must take me.
Absolutely. When you get a chance to get out here, we're going. You better believe it. And we looked, and we took probably 100 pictures of this object.
And what was weird about this is one of those things where, you hear me joking all the time and say there are no coincidences. Well, it's not really a joke. I do believe that. And sometimes it's kind of scary how that manifests itself, isn't it? And this was
especially in this story.
This was one of those days. We went. We didn't have any plan of, getting there at a certain time or anything like that. We didn't know anything about this. We didn't even know when the thing closed. We went down, and they just so happened to be having a tour that day with some of the archaeologists. And they were upstairs talking about the exhibits and the finds. And it was like, you've got to be kidding me. And, I figured, of course, when they told us this was going on, it would be like, well, no visitors. But no, they're like, oh, you can go and listen in if you want.
Get out.
No, it was, you can go listen in if you want. Okay.
So, yeah, of course, we ran up the stairs.
Yeah.
We were talking, there was one of the archaeologists that actually entertains the giant idea. The other ones follow the Smithsonian theories and what they claim. But the other one says there's too much evidence. Yeah, the other guy said that there was too much evidence to the contrary. And he said, the real operation now is going to be to try to discover one of these in modern times and actually record every bit of it. And so we were there, and we were looking, and Ron and I were standing, actually, the entire time we were listening to the lectures. We were standing right beside the artifact that we were after. And did you
realize that at the time, or did you knew
it took about 15, 20 minutes, and then we figured out, like, oh, crap, this is it, dude.
Just happened to look over and be like, oh, shit.
Well, by the pictures, we thought it was going to be larger.
We thought it was going to be larger.
We thought this was, and we were told that this was a mask, right? So we went thinking something that was going to be like 8 to 10 inches.
Gotcha.
It wasn't a mask.
It's a gorget.
It was a gorget.
It's a talisman. And the way that it was found, the way it was displayed, it has a very prominent place in the museum, which is amazing. And that's how I noticed it. It's like, look, there it is, And we go over to it.
Ron was the one that saw it.
And it's in this big plexiglass case, and it's in there, and it has some of the beads that were found with it and whatnot. This was found bundled up, I believe is what they said, right? Isn't that the story on this one?
Yep, bundled up in a leather pouch.
This was a bundle, a very, very sacred bundle. So this was not something that you or me would have had. This is something that a shaman would have had. This is something that would have been,
someone with power.
Someone with power. It would have probably only been pulled out, once a year or once every so many cycles of this, and in some ceremony. But we can only guess as to what that was. But it blew my mind, and we took so many pictures of this thing.
Now, let me ask you this, guys: Do they know what tribe it's from?
Okay.
Well, this is exactly where we're going to get into the mishandling of information.
And I won't even say mishandling as much as I'll say misinterpretation, or the need to go with the status quo. I think that that's kind of appropriate in some of it too.
Well, let me preface that with this, so then you all can jump into this other part, because just to, if the people don't already understand, I had read something once. Yes, if you didn't understand, I read.
He reads.
But I had read many accounts actually of like out west, say, and the one I read was, it had 3 or 4 different, reports of when people were moving out west, like say in the Texas area, okay, and were starting to buy land, inhabit it, trying to start their farms and plant and grow things and blah blah blah. So they would buy these tracts of land, and as they were digging, they would uncover, and this happened 3 or 4 times that in this article I was reading, and they gave the names of the people, and actually had little newspaper clippings, that they had found these bones, that it's basically a grave, a full skeleton, and they were obviously bigger than the normal human that they had knew at the time. So they contacted the Smithsonian, some way, shape, or form. They were contacted. They came out. Smithsonian came out. Their representatives came out, paid these people for the bones, took them back to the Smithsonian. Correct. So I guess somewhere down the road, like because there was news articles and everything there, they reported on blah blah blah. They had their little sketches that somebody had done a sketch and put it in the paper with it. And there was 3 or 4 different accounts that this happened. The Smithsonian came out and bought every one of these, took them back, and then when the people inquired about them, even the town officials inquired about them, they told them that basically, no, we discovered it's nothing. They were just human bone. They were just regular human bone. No big deal. Blah blah blah. It was nothing. Now here's what I know, in my thinking: the Smithsonian, at any time, any kind of place like that, which is basically a government ran deal, is not going to come out and say, "Oh, Ron, you found that? Well, let me give you," and I'll just throw a number out because I don't know. Let me give you $3,000. At that time, that was, I don't know what the amount was. They didn't say specifically. They just said it was a large sum of money that they were given. So they gave them this money, took the bones that they had found and everything else that was uncovered, and then told them, no, it was nothing. But these people got to keep the money. These people, were just dismissed after that, and it was thrown away like it was nothing. Mm-hmm. So the Smithsonian and places like that do not, and they never have, come out and just said, here's some money, we're taking this, oh, it's nothing. That's not how it operates. They're not going to give you a bunch of money for nothing.
Yeah. Well,
so that was just, to me, I went, oh my God. And this was in the 1800s,
Yeah.
So you're going, wait a minute.
Yes, but that's exactly what happened with this mask.
Oh yeah, exactly. Same. That's what I was getting ready to say. It's probably, but a lot of people don't understand that, and they don't think of that the places like that do not just come and buy nothing, knowing thinking it's nothing. Even if they think it's nothing, they're not going to do that.
Especially to put it off in storage and away from the public eye, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, keep it hidden.
The point that you just made was actually pretty substantial. The person we met there, Emily, was her name, and she was great. She entertained our notions. She didn't laugh at us. She
actually wants to come on the podcast. She wants to
actually come on the podcast at some point, which is
fantastic.
We'll have her on now that we can do that. And what was really cool about that was, she admitted they tried to buy the collection, guys.
Yep, they tried to buy the collection and stow it away.
They tried to buy the collection. And
so the Smithsonian, wait a minute, let me get this straight, just for our listeners and for me.
Yes.
You're saying that the Smithsonian contacted them and said, we want to buy all that. And they said, basically, obviously, no.
Well, here's the story of how they came into possession. Okay? Here's the chain of custody.
Okay.
A gentleman had collected all of these artifacts over the period of 40 years.
A friend of the guy that we had met.
Yeah, a friend of the guy that runs the shop that Ron and I went to. Well, he passed away, and he spent so much time with his artifacts that his wife despised them, and she wanted to throw them in the river. She wanted to take them back and dump them in the Ohio River.
Literally.
And
So it would be like Ron's wife wanting to get rid of his UFO stuff, and your wife wanting to get rid of all of your Marvel and DC stuff. You know?
No,
Yeah, pretty
she
much.
actually buys me UFO stuff.
I'm just teasing.
so what happens is the guy who actually rescued the collection was one of the gentlemen who was there, by the way, that
Which
day.
was, again,
Fantastic.
coincidence, right? No.
So he confirmed the story that we had been told, that he rescued the collection because he was at the time he was one of the curators of the museum there, and he said, let me make a display. And she said, that's fine, but I want you to take it and put it in the museum. Don't let anybody touch it. It's never for sale. It stays with the museum forever. That was the deal they struck.
And he's like, okay.
Yeah. So they came in and they got it. Now, some of the parts of the collection were, of course, given out to lawyers and people like that as payment to help cover stuff from her. So there were large portions of the collections that did get removed and found their ways elsewhere. But the mass of the collection wound up at this museum. And this one little tiny piece that everyone overlooked became one of the most iconic pieces in the museum, which was that little gorget.
Mm-hmm.
And like Ron said, it was in somebody's medicine bag.
It's made of cannel coal, by the way. And
Yes.
it's carved and polished. And
Now, wait a minute. I'm going to stop you right there.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And probably a lot of listeners don't know this either. But even if everybody else knows it, I don't. Explain that.
Yeah.
Mechanical.
Oh,
Cannel coal is
Cannel
basically
coal, yeah.
fossilized coal.
mhm.
Okay. I misunderstood what you were saying.
It's
I
my
apologize.
horrible accent.
Yeah. Oh, wait, we're from West Virginia, guys. Whoops.
No, I'm
Oh,
not.
oh.
No, not
Little
from-
joke.
No, not
We
gonna
love
do
you.
it. Not
So anyway,
going to do it.
Thank you for
yeah,
explaining that.
cannel coal
I got you.
is basically it's fossilized coal. It's anyway, but go
It
ahead.
carves really well, and it polishes even better. But someone created this, and I was really amazed. One of the things, not so much the carving and the little face, that was awesome, but what got me was the eyes on that thing and how they made the eyes. A special tool was made to make those eyes. So someone really spent a lot of time making this thing. And it wasn't like it is now. We didn't make art for art's sake. That wasn't just art. And that's what some people want to say. This was just art, or it was a representation of I don't know, what'd they say, a wildcat, a bear?
They said it was a representation of a panther, but I'll
panther.
tell you this, because we took so many pictures of it. I made a copy, guys.
Am I allowed to see one of these pictures personally?
We'll actually put the pictures up with this. We haven't shown anyone this. This is not.
Yeah, we've been holding this
discussed.
close to the chest, but we want to. We're putting it out there now. It's official.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'm holding a copy right now,
yeah. It's pretty spectacular.
and every time I look at this little thing, it just kind of freaks me out.
So here's the thing about that little thing, that artifact, and this is why it's so important. It's important because of what it is or what it could be. If it's not, a panther, if it's not a bear, and I don't think it is, I really don't, because I've seen carvings of panthers and bears. It don't look like that. If it's not that, then we have to figure out, when was it created? Was it created during the Hopewell culture, the Adena culture? This is how mounds get typically classified and dated, by the way, if you didn't know. They go in, they find some artifacts, they say, oh, this looks like this, and boom, that's the time period it's ascribed to. Now, the problem with this, and I've talked to Native people, and they'll tell you, the problem with this is they buried their stuff in these mounds as they found them. They were there before. And when you find stuff like that, it's cross-contaminated. A good point of this would be what happened with, Serpent Mound.
Serpent Mound, yeah.
With the New Agers coming in and burying stuff in there. Well, if they dig, they find Serpent Mound one day, they're gonna have a timeline of history. There's stuff in there that goes back from who knows how far at this point. So that is the big problem. So what happens when they find something that they can't quite explain is it's better to say that it's newer than older. So Most archaeologists will assign this to the Fort Ancient culture, about 1650, 1000 AD, something like that. But it could be much, much older, couldn't it? This thing could possibly be, and I'm just saying could possibly be, because there are other things in that area there are other mounds in the area. It could be over 1,000, it could be 1,000 BC. It could be 2,000 years old. I don't know, because there are finds that date back into Hopewell, Adena, etc., all around that area. So we can't necessarily say 100% fact that is it. And in fact, these dates get shifted around a lot. There's a lot of instances where what was once Hopewell moved into, now it's Fort Ancient, and vice versa. So they're always going back and forth and redefining these cultures over a period of time. So it really remains to be seen where this thing will actually end up being classified as. Right now it's Fort Ancient, but it could possibly be Hopewell. It could possibly be Adena and be much, much, much older. And that is very, very exciting if that's the case. I mean,
it could be closer to 2,000 years old.
We could be looking at Adena. We could be looking at anywhere from,
Well, the reason that many of people like us believe it to be Adena or Hopewell is because the style and the fashioning.
Yeah.
The and they said that it was a panther, but this isn't a panther. Well, the panther doesn't have a hooded nose.
Well, the thing about Adena and the Hopewell culture, there's a big difference there. The Adena seemed a lot more advanced in some of their art forms, in some of the way that they made stuff. And it's kind of weird because, they were older than the Hopewell culture, but they seemed to have a better grasp on certain things. It's almost like the Hopewell focused on something completely different. You know what I mean? It's kind of like one was more artsy and the other was like more survival, and and maybe that's what it was. Maybe that was the difference in the two cultures, because really we're dealing with the same kind of people. It's just a culture that we call, it's not, but, and these are the ancestors of our local Native Americans. They all have these stories and whatnot, but I don't know, guys. I can't say that is, I can't date it. I mean, I know archaeologists will, and I respect their decisions. I really do, but I respectfully also, offer this, because we've always said it. Everything goes on that table. Everything's got to go on that table. Yeah. If there's evidence that there are other artifacts in there that are over 1,000 years old, you can't say that this one is 500, because you can't date that thing. I don't know that it has been dated, actually.
No, you can't date cannel coal is the unfortunate thing about it. So in efforts of putting everything on the table, Ron and I has shown this trinket to multiple Native elders and Native tribesmen, all of which looked at it and went, well, that's something.
Yeah, pretty much. That was the thing. There's a couple that gave, well, it could be a panther. Okay, that's cool.
But as we had stated earlier, they also mentioned the same things that we had already observed, was that, science has actually been able to identify species of animals based off feather count, based off beak shapes, based off whisker counts, based off patterns that were sculpted onto the objects that dated back to similar eras. So if you can actually look at a artifact, if science can actually look at an artifact and determine species, like not just, well, this was a cat or this was a canine, but actually determine, well, this is a, jaguar, or this is a pileated woodpecker, or this is a, six-banded woodpecker.
Something native to the area.
Yeah. And they can look at it and easily identify it to something that was alive during that time frame and still with us for the most part today. Then why would this object be any different?
Yeah.
Why would this object? Because it has a hooded nose. Panthers, if you look at a panther face on, you can see straight into its nostrils. This object has nostrils on the bottom of his nose. It has creases, which were looked at as whiskers, I suppose, that went around the cheeks and eyes. But then it also had wrinkles going up the nose. A lot of those were also very primate features. or early hominin features. So it might be, it might not be. It's one of those things that, it's up for debate. It's up for and it's speculative.
It
but,
is. Mm-hmm.
But when you look at it, it doesn't say panther.
It's one of those things that really makes you look at it and say, could it be? It's almost like a quimbaya, isn't it? I mean, isn't it kind of like that?
It's very, very similar to quimbaya. You're exactly right.
And by that, I mean, it's like a mystery like that. It's like, could that be a bird?
It has the extremely wide cheeks.
Yeah.
A wide chin, a wide mouth that actually looks like a human kind of mouth, but the space between the upper lip and the nostril is far. It's a big gap.
Yeah. It's a very, very cool piece. And, it's still under review. There are people still looking at this thing and, trying to figure it out. You can go down and take a look at it yourself. I mean, the museum. Yep. I don't know if they're still open. I have no idea through all this.
I think they're closed through this for the most part.
But when things come back to normal, definitely get down and check that out. It's definitely worth going and seeing because it's something. Yep. What it is, I can't tell you. Can't tell you it's a Bigfoot. Don't know, but I think it is. I think this way. If there is anything in Native culture that was recorded that was going to look like a Bigfoot, it would be that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it goes right there with a lot of the Bigfoot carved masks, the Sasquatch mask, the Zuniqua mask, the Stone Man mask. It's in that same field, right?
Right, but we don't have that on the East Coast, so...
Right, this would, especially this early, this would predate all of that by around 1,000 years.
It could.
So anyway, back to the giants, because it could be Bigfoot, it could be something else. We're all in this world of speculation, but we do know for a fact the Smithsonian has withheld information, and there's even podcasts you can go listen to that will debate this topic, and then they're like, oh, well, no, they're not. Why do you say they're not? Because they're telling you they're not. If anything, the last few years should tell you that nowhere in government is telling you the truth.
Question everything.
The Smithsonian is essentially the government's museum.
It goes back to this disinformation.
It does.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it kind of does. And you have to wonder, what in the world kind of a secret are you guys hiding? You right? Like, what could you be hiding that is so damaging to the social culture, the collective of humanity, that you would go so far as to what it looks like erase history or bury a hidden part of our past? And it sounds crazy. It sounds completely lunatic. I get that because, I used to look at that and be like, that's the craziest stuff I ever heard. But when you really start looking at it, you're like, wait a minute. This seems familiar. Cover up, Roswell. It all kind of goes together into this vast, program of, like you said, disinformation, denial. And then you have to think, well, what in the world could the end game be? What secret is so important that it has to be covered up like that?
They'll tell you what they want you to believe.
Well, they absolutely
will.
Well,
this entire topic is one of those that makes you question a lot of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The chasing giants. We've got so many just in West Virginia alone and the western portion of the Ohio Valley. There are so many stories of giants being discovered in fields, being discovered in mounds that were accidentally uncovered, that weren't part of an official excavation of any kind, that were just found by accident for people clearing property for their homes or people clearing property for a field. Because the thing about a mound is, unless you keep it up, trees will grow in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and suddenly it's just a bump in the ground. It's a small hill.
Nature takes it back, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure does.
And so these people won't know. They'll clear the trees and then they'll flatten the land. But in the process of flattening the land, they'll find these graves, and some of them are mass graves, some of them are just mounds dedicated to single individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been found all over. There's evidence of giants throughout all of history, but we decide to ignore it for whatever reason, because someone tells us not to. You know, someone says, no, that's hogwash. You don't need to believe that. Well, then why is it there? It can't just all be folklore.
To them, it's better to just ignore it, say it's folklore, myth, and legend, rather than investigate the possibility that it could actually be real. And then to make everyone question themselves who think that, this could be real, they run these, like Wayne said, disinformation campaigns, stories of how, it's all explained away as, I think some of the giants in the 1800s we explained away as people finding mastodon skulls and
Yeah,
and
they
such,
did that.
right?
You're right.
That was one
Because
thing.
this area did have some mastodon, but it also,
But-
they were finding skulls and they thought they were like cyclopses.
Well, there you go. And it's another thing, isn't it? It's one of those things like, oh, well, this fits this part of the story, so let's use that to explain it away, and let's just ignore this other part over here where we found the big copper tools.
It's as simple as this, and I don't mean to bring this into it, but it's so true. Himmler in Germany said one thing that is so truthful. If you tell the people the same thing enough times, they will believe it.
Well, yeah, you only need 10% of the people to believe the lie. The
So
rest
it's just
will follow.
propaganda. It's
It-
literally,
it
he was the
is.
master of propaganda.
Well, it is propaganda. And
yes, and that's all it is.
And it works. And that is why we, as a species, seem to have, no clue where we came from, what was here before us. It's just massively, to me, it's an injustice. It's a scholarly injustice is what it is. And I don't know. I mean, I guess they're afraid that we might find out that we're not quite human, possibly. I don't know. Maybe that's it. At this point, what does it matter? What does it even matter at this point where our genetic makeup really came from? Because we're all here. We're all right here on this planet. We're not going anywhere at this point that I know of. But what's in our genes? Do we have the giant gene? It's possible, I guess. I mean, you gotta.
But in a lot of things, it will change so much if people really found out. It would change religions.
Sure.
It would change. I mean, just everything. And it's going to affect everything, and they don't want that.
I think that's true.
The powers that be do not want any, because they have their agenda. And I'm not trying to get political, but it's the truth. People throughout history have always had their agenda. I mean, look at King James when the
canonization.
I mean, I'm going to, when I redo the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pick and choose what goes in there.
Right.
And that's basically, and I'm sure I'll get backlash for that. But as Joe knows, that's the truth.
No, I mean,
why were some books left out?
Well, the Book of Enoch is one of those books, and the Book of Giants.
Enoch is one of those.
These are real things. It's another part. Our history has been
and like the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. Why were they taken and hidden? Because they knew that. Oh goodness.
Yeah. If someone sees this, it's hidden away and protected, and thankfully it was.
Yes.
Here's a short list off, guys. I'm going to spout off a few different articles here that we have referenced in our book that we've been putting together, but we're just going to go ahead and broadcast it here for you guys to hear it. And these are from the Smithsonian Institute or other government institution studies, okay? 12th annual report of the ethnology from the Smithsonian Institute, 7.5-foot giant krill mound. The very same report, 2 7.5-foot giants were found in number 11, which is the Shawnee Mound. The Bureau of Ethnology 5th annual report, 1883-84, was below the center of number 7, sunk into the original Earth, was a vault 8 feet in length and 3 feet wide. They measured these from the inside proportions, okay? So this isn't the exterior proportions. These are the interior, like where the whatever was inside was laid. Laying extended on its back amid rotten fragments of a bark coffin laid a 7-foot-long skeleton. Then, 12th annual report, Bureau of American Ethnology, Smithsonian Institute. Number 11, now 35 by 40 feet at the base and 4 feet high. And then it says there were a skeleton fully 7 feet long, extended at full length on the back with the head facing west, feet pointing east. Then the 12th annual report, Smithsonian Institution, 1894. At a depth of 14 feet, a rather large skeleton was found in a partially upright position with its back against a hard clay wall. The bones were badly decayed, except those of the left wrist, which had been preserved by 2 large copper bracelets. So here are those copper bracelets coming back again. Then we have another skeleton found in the very same mound that was 7.5 feet with the 19 inches across the shoulders. Then we've got a giant's axe that was found in Charleston in 1902. It was documented by the West Virginia Historical Magazine, Volume 2. And it says that he found the skeleton of a giant which measured 7 feet 8 inches in length, and that was with the bones fully put together, not disjointed and spread out. And that he found an axe of granite, beautifully made, and it weighed 7 pounds 8 ounces. It was the largest that had ever been found in that area, because these axes were something that was common along with these giants, these big, massive Adena axe heads.
And we've actually held one of those, to let you know.
We've held a few of them and have pictures.
Yeah, they're pretty monstrous, and they say they're ceremonial, but yeah, okay. Anyway.
There's too much use on them for them to be ceremonial.
There's too much to put into making one of those things. I mean,
right?
Yeah, this is a tool. Okay.
So the Washington Post, June 23rd, 1908, Huntington, West Virginia, on June 22nd, they discovered a prehistoric mound near 13th Street, which is modern day. It's like if you live in West Virginia and Huntington, it's like Central City. And in the base of this mound was a gigantic human skeleton that was over 7 feet in length and had massive proportions, surrounded by massive rude trinkets, including 8 huge copper bracelets. There are those copper bracelets again. Again, another massive axe head and large spears and a ton of arrowheads were found along with the skeleton. Then West Virginia Geological Survey, 1914. This is in the center of number 7. This is one of the ones that was completely destroyed and gone in Charleston. There was a total of 84 mounds in the area, and there's only 2-3 left in that area now, guys. So below the center of number 7, fully 7 feet long, they found was in decay a human skeleton, fully 7 feet long, again with its head pointing west, feet facing east. There were 50 circular pieces of white perforated shell, ceremonial. Great care was taken. Each one of the shells was roughly 1 inch in diameter. Then one of this one's arms was laid across his chest. So, it was perceived that this would indicate that he was not a warrior, but was of some great importance, because they also didn't find any weapons in this vault, particularly. Then in the Raleigh Herald in Marion County, there was a large human jaw and a skull, or fragments of skull that fit in a 2-gallon bucket, which is basically a milk pail. Like when you think of a 2-gallon bucket, it's those little aluminum buckets, like a milk pail, and had a low sloped forehead. You heard that, low sloped forehead, and a long underjaw. The ribs, as far as can be determined, are 3 times the size of that of an average man.
Think about that. One
thigh bone, which was well preserved, being wrapped in leather, measures 4.5 feet in length.
That's big, folks.
And that's not a mastodon, because they actually recovered a human skull.
Right.
So then there were numerous small bones that were the fingers that were discovered. This one was just kind of buried there in the field. There was no preservation to it. It was just a skeleton that was found.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. They're not always in mounds.
No, they're not.
They're not.
And then the Charleston Gazette. A Salem professor discovers a huge skeleton in mounds Dr. Sutton believes to be tribe of giants once inhabited Doddridge County section. The data on exploration will go into Smithsonian Institute and subsequently never return.
And that's pretty much what happens to all of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Subsequently disappear forever.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Then
we have another one from the Fort Wayne Gazette. We have another one from another Herald report. We have another from another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more from more government surveys, geological surveys, Smithsonian ethnology reports. There were 5 more that I could go off of, and that's just our short list, guys. That's not even the full list of reports. This is a short list. That's it. There's 5 more that I could keep going on.
So I got to ask, we all have our theories and whatnot. And like I said, it's fun to speculate every now and again. and data aside, what do you think that these giants were?
Well,
Pure speculation. No one's going to hold you
pure
to absolutely believe in it. Just pure speculation.
pure speculation draws me to some of the stuff, because I have to look at all the native lore that's going on around and all the different things that you hear from different First Nation tribes, specifically the Shawnee, and how they were terrified of this valley. One thing to note about this valley, it has been notoriously foggy for centuries. Ever since the Taze River flowed through this area, which was back like when the glacier was still just north of us. The Taze River flowed through this area and created a massive wetland straight through the middle of West Virginia, and that's what became the Kanawha River Valley. This whole area is thick with fog during the fall, spring, and winter seasons. Not so much during summer. It stays a little too hot during the summer, but during the fall, spring, and winter, or fall, winter, and spring, it's very foggy at any given moment. Now imagine you're coming into this area, you're seeing the silhouettes through the fog, and you hear these inaudible groans, and you see these massive giant silhouettes. You would think that those were ghosts of giants. Now me, looking at this from a natural perspective and not trying to be as, spooky, if I'm looking into the fog and I see this giant silhouette and I hear these groaning growls and moans, I'm not looking at a ghost. I'm going to think I'm looking at a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And either way, I'm not going to, if I see a bunch of them, I'm not going to keep paddling my canoe upriver.
Yeah, you're going to move on.
I'm going to get out of there. That's their territory. I'm going to leave it alone. With that said, it is a possibility that some of these skeletons that were found could be the remains of alleged Sasquatch. It could be the remains of Bigfoot. It could also be the remains of white giants, that were not from, originally from here, but somehow made it here, that, some kind of Scandinavian people. It could be both. The Bigfooter in me wants to say, oh, it's Bigfoot. But there's more to it than that. We found relics like this gorget that definitely, to me, screams Bigfoot. But then there's other things, you haven't heard too many stories of, Bigfoot wielding massive axes or spears.
Right.
We don't have that in modern day accounts. You don't see people giving these testimonies of Sasquatch throwing these spears. And mind you, these spears were like 18 inches by like 8 inches wide. And they weighed like 5.5 pounds. And this was a spearhead.
Right. So it was an actual tool. So we don't have that.
It could be something where, the other tribe was displaced to an extent where now they're just in pure survival mode and they don't use tools and they try to stay away from humanity. It's a possibility. But I see hints as well towards the fact that these were some technologically advanced people that were recovering from a cataclysmic event.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had the ability to make tools. They had the ability to make weapons. They had the ability to make art.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that these people were remnants of whatever happened.
Well, that makes sense. And we're going to agree on that. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that these people were what were left behind.
Yeah.
Whether they are what we call Bigfoot today, or whether it was actually a distinct race of beings that were the white giants, that were the white-skinned giants, or were these massive beings that coexisted for a time and then went to war with for a time. But you would think that such a creature or being so much larger than us and having similar technologically advancements of that era would at least have some hang time and wouldn't be completely eradicated, unless through interbreeding. That could be where we come with the gigantism. That could be somehow where it got, they just interbred with the locals and became, more normal sized, just through generational breeding. We see that in big cats and in reptiles, and generational breeding for specific traits and whatnot. You can bring out features. That's how the whole dog, purebred dogs became a thing, was generational selective breeding. So it could have been a similar thing that occurred with, making themselves smaller
And then
Right.
when you inbreed like that, what happens? Other things happen. You start to get other problems.
Yep.
Just like look at the old Spanish royalty, how they did it,
Oh
and they
yeah,
basically
absolutely. You
killed
get all
themselves
kinds of
off.
mutations.
They
Mutations begin to show up.
yeah, they
So
really killed themselves off in a manner.
so to me, I believe that some of these could be Bigfoot and some of them could be another culture. And until we have enough evidence to back either of those claims up, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm on the fence.
Yeah, I think that's a safe place to be. I mean, I really do. All that we know is that if we look at the old legends, and we have to, let's be real, if we look at their old legends, we see that there are mentions of something very technologically advanced coming here, conducting some form of experimentation or commingling with our whatever we were before. Um, and the offspring of that commingling happened to create something gigantic is the term. So what those things are out there today, I don't know. I couldn't tell you that, but I do know that there's definitely evidence, in my opinion, there is evidence that there was a race of giant beings that were on this planet. Now, there may be other things that were here as well. I mean, we don't know. But for this part of the journey, the giants, in my opinion, it's a hard fact for me. I mean, I can't deny it. Wayne?
Oh, I'm right there with you guys. I mean, it's and until you have either some evidence that disputes either one of those theories or supports one of those theories or both theories, I mean, it's you have to consider every little thing like we've talked about. You have to, like you've said, Ron, it has to all be on the table.
Yeah.
And you can't, you can personally believe what you want and close your mind and go, it's got to be this, it's got to be this, it's got to be this. But when you do that, you're immediately dismissing every other theory.
Yeah, you are.
So to me, you can't do that. You have to keep it all on the table. You have to keep listening to the research, the evidence. You have to keep researching and form more and more opinions, just like with any research you do. I mean, whether it be UFOs, whether it be, the religion, whether it be, Bigfoot, whether it be, whatever the case may be, you have to keep everything on the table until we have definite evidence supporting one, the other, or all of it.
Yeah.
Because it could very well be all of it.
Yeah, what you said. I mean, it almost seems like it is all somehow related, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's, I think that's the weird part that people have a problem with, is that it could all possibly be related. And maybe that's the big reason for the cover up. Like you said, look at how much it would change if we found out that, and I've said it before, if we are the product of genetic manipulation, and those things out there in the woods that are elder brothers may actually be our elder brothers. They may actually be what was here on this planet before whatever came down here and manipulated us today, turned us into what we are. So think about it that way. What if that were true? And if that is true, good Lord. I mean, you're gonna see huge backlash over that if that turned out to be true. So I could probably understand keeping a secret that big. I'll be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have all of this new research that's been coming out in late 2020 and the last couple of weeks that's pointing at a couple unknown human relatives.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
One of which is still locked in South African inhabitants and original people that were from the South African area. Mm-hmm. Their DNA has a hidden ancestor. And then there's also been remains pulled from caves that have the DNA of two other hidden ancestors that we also have hidden commonalities with in modern day human. Yeah. So we might be stepping closer and closer every day to finding out, well, maybe these giants really were in the museum, and the reason they wouldn't show them to us is because they thought we weren't ready. No one really knows that until that actually will come out as to why they did that, similar to probably the UFO phenomena. And, why they've kept that all under locks until this past couple years. So,
well, we've even seen in the past couple of weeks, though, that they push back the age of the migration, right? Like humanity itself.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, we're even an older race at this point. So, wow. I mean, there's just so much stuff coming out, and it's going to be something. I mean, just keep watching. You know, we're going to grab these stories as much as we can, put them up on our talk page, but you're going to see it. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out. So just keep watching, and you know, and if you have any stories yourself, especially about the giants and whatnot, hey, get a hold of us. We want to hear those stories, because this is stuff that needs to be preserved. This doesn't need to be locked away in a box somewhere. This doesn't need to be, you know, hidden. There's enough of that hiding of our history at this point. Tell those stories and let us keep them. We're not going to take them and, you know, I don't know why people don't share these stories, because we're not making fun of them. We're trying to keep them and preserve them for everyone. It's important history, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we will continue this discussion on finding giants, because there's far more to this. So if you send in some of your stories,
I'm sure it's going to be intermingled in with future topics, you know, of the same ilk.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Chapter 3 of this will be coming up shortly in the next month or so. And
what I'm saying is that even when we talk about Bigfoot or anything like that, we're going to end up.
Oh yeah, we'll be able to reference and come back.
Yeah. So if they don't know, the whole Fallen Worlds thing, that it all goes together. So when you see those episodes, you'll be able to actually click on those episodes, and it's all going to tell a big story, is how it's going to work.
Agreed.
So it's going to be a really cool project, and I'm happy to be able to, you know, get part 2 of this off the ground. So can't wait to get this one out.
So remember, folks, you heard it here first. We are in possession of a copy of what we believe to be one of the earliest Bigfoot effigies. And we also, one of the other theories that we threw out there, which I believe we were the first to make the claim about, was the Shawnee and the valley of, you know, being haunted by the ghosts of dead giants, and the theory that probably could have been actually Bigfoot. So that you heard those first here, guys. Those were stories that are not stories, but theories that we've come up with. And you will see them probably getting spread far and wide here shortly, once this information starts getting out, because we have spoke with some researchers over the last few years on this, and essentially they've been waiting on us to break out the story, and then you're going to start seeing more of this. So
a lot of people ask us why we don't, like, if you saw this, well, if you knew this, then why didn't you say? Well, because we don't do things that way. We run all of our stuff through peer review. We run our stuff through people who have been in it way longer than we have. You'll even hear us mention that in a lot of our takes. I know when we did the footprint, when we found that, I think one of the things I said was something like, tell other, you know, more knowledgeable people look at this, and that's what we were talking about. So it can be there for months or a year, as in this case. And
in this case, it was actually. Do you know it's actually been almost a year to the day
now, because it was still open when we went, and that was one of the last last times we were.
That was the last thing we did.
Yeah, it was. It was the last thing we did, really. So yeah,
we went. It was the 2nd of February, I believe.
So that is why we don't come out and, you know, reveal these things right away. We want to make sure everything's all right. We don't want to release something and then have to go back and retract it. That's not how
we just don't want to come off half-cocked. We want to give all of our evidence full, thorough review before presenting it to you guys.
And then you can make your own mind up.
You can make your own mind up after that. And we're comfortable at this point with delivering some of this information, and especially this artifact and the theory on the artifact. So thanks for listening into this episode. I hope you've all enjoyed part 2 of Fallen Worlds. There will be more, and there will also be more in the Chasing Giants. Now, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. We're going to do something extra special, and it'll only be something that you, the listeners, will have a chance to get in on. We will be giving away a copy of the Salamander Cast through the radio show. And we're going to come up with the rules, and we'll give those to you next week. And we will be making the call just after the 1-year anniversary. So stay tuned for that information. Keep an eye out on the boards. Keep an ear tuned into the show, because that's where you're going to get the rules for that. If you want to catch up with us on any of our other episodes, you can go to wildandweirdwv.com. Click on podcasts. Go ahead and feel free to peruse our entire backlog. If you want to help support the show and support us as artists, you can go over to the store tab. It'll open up all of the avenues that we have there, and you can take a look at any of our merchandise that you want. That helps us keep this show completely free for everybody, not having to hassle people with Patreons, not having to hassle people with other forms of donations or this, that, and the other. So if you've had a sighting or you've had some kind of a strange experience, go click on the Contact Us tab on wildandweird.com. You can report your sighting there. UFOs, Bigfoot, ghost, poltergeist phenomena, anything that you cannot explain that you would like to have recorded or possibly investigated, you can send us your data there. It will be reviewed. It will be cataloged. It will be looked at seriously. We will not make fun of you. We will not make fun of your story. We will look at it objectively. We will get back with you and give you a honest review of what we think might be happening. So until next time, everybody, stay wild and weird.